Coming up on Windows Weekly, I, Micah Sargent, am subbing in for Leo Laporte. We've got Richard Campbell and Paul Thurrott here, and we've got a lot to cover. We kick things off with an AI/Bing chat, and yes, that is a bit of a pun. First, with Samsung maybe considering replacing Google search with Bing. Could Apple follow after that? What's going to happen to the future of Google search? Plus, we talk about Bing making its way into Swiftkey and Microsoft Start. It just keeps popping up left and right. Microsoft creating its own AI hardware, Windows 11 updates, and Xbox. Plus, our tips and picks of the week. Stay tuned for Windows Weekly.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Windows Weekly with Micah Sargent in for Leo Laporte, episode 825, recorded Wednesday, April 19th, 2023. You're not a normal human. This episode of Windows Weekly is brought to you by Miro. Miro is your team's visual platform to connect, collaborate, and create together. Tap into a way to map processes, systems, and plans with the whole team and get your first 3 boards for free to start creating your best work yet at miro.com/podcast. And by Cisco Meraki. With employees working in different locations, providing a unified work experience seems as easy as herding cats. How do you rein in so many moving parts? Well, with the Meraki Cloud Managed Network. Learn how your organization can make hybrid work work. Visit meraki.cisco.com/twit. And by CacheFly. CacheFly is the only CDN built for throughput, delivering rich media content up to 10 times faster than traditional delivery methods and 30% faster than other major CDNs. Learn how you can get your first month free at cachefly.com. It's time for Windows Weekly, the show where we talk all things Windows, Microsoft, and all of the stuff that Windows and Microsoft have to do with. I am your host, Micah Sargent, in for Leo Laporte, and I am joined, as always, by 2 of the greatest Windows watchers in the world.
Of all time.
To my right is...
I don't know what happened there.
Paul Thurrott of Thurrott.com. How you doing, Paul?
I am doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good.
And to my left, noted black tea drinker, it's Richard Campbell coming to us from a new location this week. Hello, Richard. Where are you calling from?
I am in Studio C in Building 25 on the Microsoft campus in Redmond. It's the MVP Summit this week, so I was able to sneak out and borrow a studio for a few hours.
Nice.
I like that front page and Windows Me are prominently featured in the room you're in. It's nice.
Yeah. This is one of the small studios. I've done a bunch of things in here over the years, but it has a whole bunch of archaic Microsoft technology back here. Some Windows 2000 Professional, enterprise editions of thing. I think there's a Studio 2010 up there. It's awesome.
Yeah, what is that to the left of Visual Studio? It's red and blue.
Thing.
Yeah, it's like a cube of some kind with a big red button on top of it. I think it's one of the game show buzzers.
Oh, now I just really want to press it, and I'll spend the rest of
So basically, Microsoft is a hoarder, is what I'm saying.
This is a carefully organized hoarding room. There's a HoloLens over there and a R2D2. Like there's bits and pieces. There's
Sure.
We were not far from the 16, 17, 18 complex where they put down the big tiles for each product.
Yeah.
I think they really keep that up to about 2008. And it's like, that's too many products. We don't have enough tiles.
Oh, wow. I remember Scott Hanselman giving a little tour of the software archives. And
last week's build.
Yeah, that was super cool to see that they've got everything down there.
The archivists are lovely. They're really great people, and it's a lot of stuff. This campus has got a certain gravity to it, especially with the MVP Summit, first time in person in 3 years. Right. So there's a lot of brand new MVPs who've never been here before, and they're just kind of
how cute. It's like the first day of school.
It's exactly like. So we're all in Building 33, which is the conference center, typically.
Yep. Building 33 used to be. Oh no, you're right. This is the old executive conference center.
That's right. The EBC is now built above it.
Got it. Sorry.
So
When you said that, I thought it was the Windows building, but that was 37, maybe 35.
Yeah. I've
lost track.
I live 3 hours drive from here, so I've come down to Redmond almost every month for various reasons, and check in with teams. If you ever wondered why .NET Rocks always seems to be on point for the next show, next technology, that kind of thing, they tell me. I'm just not allowed to tell you until it gets released, so I'm able to build shows to help people get ready.
Well, it's good that the trust is there. That's nice.
Yeah. Well, they left me alone in the studio. I don't know how wise that is.
Once you press the button, we'll find out. Again, I'm just going to be thinking about that button. Anyway, we should probably talk about the things that Paul Thurrott has gathered here for us.
The things.
In the show
The
notes.
things.
The things, the topics. Starting with Microsoft Bing and AI. Samsung might be getting into the mix. What's that about?
Yeah. So I assume you guys have talked about this on one of the other shows, but there was a news report this week. I want to say from Bloomberg. I can't remember, but that Samsung was allegedly considering replacing Google search on their devices with Bing.
Mm-hmm.
So I had two reactions to that. One was I thought they couldn't do that, right? Because of the licensing agreement they have to license full Android. But the second one was, you know what? We don't actually know what agreement Samsung has with Google. They're the biggest OEM. They could probably do lots of different things that smaller companies can't.
Sure.
So maybe. And I got to say, I don't think going with Samsung wouldn't move that needle that much. But you know what would? Apple doing the same, right? The Apple deal with Google for search is worth over $10 billion a year, if I'm not mistaken, and probably drives a significant amount of traffic to that thing. And if there's any company on this earth that would like to prevent the privacy stealing ways of Google on their devices, I have to think that company is Apple.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is kind of interesting all around. Apple, of course, doesn't suffer from any of the licensing issues, so that's not a big deal. But Samsung falls. I mean, I have to think Apple's going to be right behind them.
Conversations going on now. There's no way there isn't.
Yeah.
All those companies are always in contact at some level. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if it's just a talk in that space. Always the question is, how's the search? Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's not go there yet. but there are little things in the news from time to time that suggest some of this monopoly stuff is going to fall, right? Mm-hmm. Apple or Google. Google is now, I think, talking to the UK about lowering their licensing fees through the App Store and allowing third-party payment systems on Android. Yeah. This is how the dominoes start to fall, right? Because all of these kind of belligerent monopolistic practices that these two companies have, Google and Apple in this case on mobile, are almost certainly going to be found to be anti-competitive and illegal in various jurisdictions. So
I'd be interested to see when Samsung's due to renegotiate contracts with Google, because this is good positioning for negotiating a new agreement with Google.
Yep. Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, I heard you were having some kind of a red alert thing or something.
Yeah.
We were thinking about paying less for the same thing. How does that sound? That kind of thing. Sure.
Yeah, no, I think that might be the positioning piece, but it's also the thing is, it serves Google. They are under attack to some degree about their monopolistic practices. So anytime you can point to a competitor is competing, you kind of undermine that message.
Right. The other thing too is this is Samsung, and so it's been kind of quiet on this front lately. But for years, I've been kind of making the argument that Samsung had set out to replace as much of Google as they could on their devices, and anyone who wants to look, whatever you think of Samsung, there are a lot of duplicate apps and services on their devices, right? Mm-hmm. At some point there will be a Samsung Maps, and at some point they just basically try to replace Google everywhere. That's kind of their model. Maybe this is a step in that direction too.
Android Authority has a write-up talking about what you were suggesting.
But nobody knows what Samsung's doing. My point is, this is we all know this. My point is, Samsung is probably bigger than all of the OEMs combined outside of China anyway. And I think they have a different kind of leverage over Google than other companies. So this is the private deal. If, Bob's computer company or whatever wants to license Android, they have to sign this agreement for sure. But Samsung is in a slightly different sphere here. So I guess my point is simply, we don't actually know what deals that Samsung and Google have that are separate from this. So it's possible they have different capabilities.
Yeah, and how much of this is just posturing versus an actual attempt to change anything?
Right.
I've tried so many different search engines, and I always end up back at Google.
Yeah, me too.
No matter and I know Leo's big on. I think it's like I can't remember now what it's called.
Yeah, it begins with an N. It's like a paid search service. But I've used, you probably have DuckDuckGo, Brave Search, obviously Bing, back when that was a thing. Those there are. I'm sure there are many. Yeah, but most people have that same reaction. And part of it might not literally be I'm doing a side-by-side comparison and I like what I see on Google. I don't like what I see over here. So a part of it, I think, is just familiarity,
absolutely.
Look and feel.
Yeah, it's that the way that I expect a search to be returned, because I've used Google for so long, obviously
it's like
Google
when you
can provide it.
A lot of movies and TV shows will have someone go to a Google-like search page on the internet. It's like search.com or something. And it doesn't quite look like Google, but it's sort of like those other search services are often like that. Mm-hmm. And it's like, so this is like a search service from like a Van Damme movie or something? Like,
yeah.
Every search is just, ipsum lorem, all the results.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, but then it makes me wonder if Samsung were to do this, are people going to be, the average person, are they even going to be aware that their search engine has changed? Will they know that they can go in and switch search engines, or will it just be, I mean, that kind of seems to be what's most valuable to Google is you just have this default and people tend, the average person tends not to change from that default.
Yeah. So I guess it depends on what is the search interface like on these phones. So the deal with Apple, if I understand it, is the search is inside of Safari, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a standalone search thing.
Right.
On Android, there's a search box on the home screen. Or there's many times that Google has one. So obviously you type a search query in there, it loads Chrome, and it has probably a Google Discover type interface, and you get search results, whatever. So it's this thing that's kind of familiar. I don't know. I don't have a Samsung device in front of me, but I wonder if Samsung does the same thing, or if it's slightly different, or how they surface this. I know Amazon. I know that Samsung has their own web browser that no one probably uses, but whatever, it's there. They have their own widgets and things for their home. They have their own UI and whatever you want to call that stuff. So I don't know how they surface search results, but the more they change it, the less you would be likely to notice. If the UI remains the same, if it's some Samsung specific thing, you might not even realize it happened, other than the fact that the search results would be terrible. but I mean, as far as, I think UI is a big part of it.
I agree. Yes, it is the familiarity of the UI that seems to be the bigger. And so you wouldn't necessarily. The Android Authority article has a photo at the top of a Samsung phone, and on that main screen you can see the search bar, and it says search with Google. So I guess it would say search with Bing. But if they here's my advice: just say search. Don't say with Bing. Yeah. It has this taste to it.
I don't use a Samsung device. My wife has a year-old Samsung device. Every time I look at it, I get frustrated. No, I mean that honestly. But there's some interesting cross-licensing stuff going on, even in this very screen, right? So they're using the Google Messages app, which is a fairly new development. Samsung used to have their own Messages app. I believe they're using their own phone app, even though Google has their own app for that. Right, obviously Chrome and Google Search are the defaults. Samsung has their own camera app. They're using OneDrive, and they have that right on the top. I guess they use that for backup or whatever, photo backup probably, whatever. But they have Play Store and Galaxy Store. I mean, this is it's a very clean looking design, but even in this small screen, you can see the weirdness of Samsung. It's like a bunch of different places to get stuff. That's kind of the Samsung.
And they've always had their own UI look, right?
Yeah. I don't mind the UI. I don't mind the look, honestly. I think it looks pretty good. The One UI or whatever. It's the duplication stuff I don't really like. why are there two calculator apps? Why are there two calendar apps? Why are there two? It's this kind of goes on and on and on. Like they have to include the Google stuff because that's part of their licensing agreement, I guess. And they also feel the need to make another one that has their own name on it for some reason.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to know the usage on that. Like, I generally like a bare metal Android device, right?
Yeah.
Give me a I know what I'm getting.
Right. Yeah. Same.
Yes, I mean I've got the Pixel, and that is specifically for just having Android as pure as it can be. And anytime I've used a different Android device, I'm always going, what is all this stuff on top? Why is there gunk on the lens? It feels like I'm just not getting
Google experience in general, right? Like, at least you're used to looking past Google ads in a Google search.
Oh, that's true.
That's right.
Sort of
we would try. I will say, we can't blame the third parties, the hardware makers, for these problems, right? This is part of the Google licensing requirement. Maybe this is part of something that falls down and is related to this possibility of Bing being on Samsung. That these companies want to make devices that have their own branding and whatever. They're trying to sell their own product, but they also have to license Android, and to do that, you get these requirements from Google, and there you go. It's like when Windows 95 came out and all the PC makers wanted to put Netscape on the desktop, and Microsoft said no, and we have our own browser now, and blah blah blah. It kind of went back and forth, and this is the same kind of battle.
Right.
They don't. Google doesn't want you to put Firefox or some other browser on there, and they certainly don't want you not to have Chrome regardless, right? So Chrome becomes a requirement, and they really do what Microsoft did back in the day, because a lot of these kind of secondary and tertiary screens you see are actually run by Chrome, even though you don't realize it, right? Like that Google Discovery feed is just a front end to Chrome.
And I think we see more search boxes around that just have no attachment to a browser anymore, or at least you can't see it, so you don't know what it's searching on. It just happens.
That's right.
In the end, it'll all be chatbots.
That's right. You just be talking to yourself, basically.
Yeah, it's on the iOS side. It's interesting how Apple has slowly attempted to circumvent sometimes Google. If you use the Spotlight search, the basic built-in search, they will, in the case of typing in a celebrity name or certain plants and those kinds of things, it will go as direct as possible. So IMDb is essentially what it looks for, or it will have sort of a little database of information instead of providing that option to search via Google or, open your browser and look there.
This isn't the topic per se, but I feel like this is the natural extension of it, because, like I said, Apple is the most obvious candidate to do something like this. There were stories that Apple was looking at Bing a few years ago, actually. When you think about Apple's stance on privacy and all the marketing they do around that, and everything you do on the iPhone stays on the iPhone, the one big gaping hole in that strategy is that they use Google search as the default for search. And they do that because that's what people want. That's what they expect. I mean, they have to. They're forced to. But Google or Apple strategy, just like Samsung, is to replace as many partners as they can and do everything themselves, right? So there are rumors of Apple maybe working on their own search engine, for example, or whatever. But they want to get rid of that, right? That they would love for their audience not to want Google, because honestly, it is a hole. It's a real problem when you're saying everything you do is private. It's like then you're sending stuff to Google about those people.
Yeah, especially given the search deal that's in place.
Yep.
So the company is making money off of that. And that
billions and billions at home.
Yeah, that is not necessarily a good look if you are claiming in one breath, protection of privacy.
Right.
All right. Let's move on to talk about the Bing chatbot coming to the keyboard, I think both now on iOS and on Android. Yeah.
Yeah. Hooray. So, I know around the world, there were people who are not Microsoft users per se. They don't use Windows maybe. And they're laughing, right? Because they see this Bing button appearing everywhere. It's on the Windows taskbar now. It's in Edge, Well, now it's on your phone too. So keep laughing, guys. It's going to be everywhere. It's coming for you. The interesting thing about the Bing button on Swiftkey is the Microsoft owned now virtual keyboard, right, for Android and iOS. it's one of those things that people like that kind of stuff or not. To me, these things never work as well as the built-in one for some reason. I'm sure there's an integration issue. This was always a big issue on the iPhone in particular, where sometimes the real keyboard would come through, even though we're using a different keyboard, whatever. But, it's customizable, all that kind of stuff. But Microsoft is sticking Bing everywhere they can, and they added its Swiftkey. And I'm sure some people like it, but just as is the case in Edge, as is the case in Windows, a lot of people said, yeah, okay, but can I get rid of this, please? I don't necessarily want this giant blue button on my stupid, keyboard.
Yeah, so, I have so much room on my phone in the first place.
Yeah, and this is the way Microsoft releases software today. There's not a lot. There's no testing in this case. There's no word it's coming. It just arrives. People complain, and then they say, oh, okay, sorry, we'll give you the opportunity to get rid of that. When it should have been obvious from the get-go that some big percentage of the population that uses this product would not want that there, but that's the world we live in. So here we are. Anyway, you can expect this stupid chatbot button to be
everywhere. I think actually, Paul, if you look behind you, it's just showed up there. It's sort of coming into frame.
It's creeping up behind the thing.
Yeah. I'm here.
Yeah. Did you say you wanted something?
Oh, no, it's the new clipping. Oh, not again.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Let me lie to you.
Yes. Animated paper clips are your friends. Come on.
Yeah, you thought Gilbert Gottfried was terrible. Now it's like a pathological liar. It's
there's got to be a Clippy in this room somewhere.
There's got to be, yeah. The Clippy costume has got to be within a couple hundred feet of you.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, what is the benefit? Is this just Microsoft attempting to make sure that everyone sees its AI prowess in the end? Because, of course, the chatbot has all of this technology. Are they just trying to get everybody familiar with it to prepare them for when Copilot is fully official?
I think they're just capitalizing on the publicity and, relative success that Bing has had in the wake of the ChatGPT integration stuff. So
when's the last time that Microsoft had a PR hit?
I know. No, really. Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah. It would do what you can. I mean, I don't think it's a good idea, but while you got some momentum here, maybe you'll win a few folks. You can't get Bing into the iPhone very easily, so we stuck it in the keyboard.
Well, but this is a way to get Bing into the iPhone when you think about it, because Apple sees what's happening here too, and they're like, interesting.
Yeah,
I can assure you, Bing would cost them a lot less.
It's a good play. It's good to turn it off too, because that'll also tell you more, right? How many people said stop wasting my screen space and pushed it away?
Right. That seems to be the reaction every time they add it anywhere, frankly. But I would imagine Microsoft Start. Most people probably don't know what that is. It's basically the old MSN website. It's just a news aggregation site with terrible sources.
Yeah, they really do seem to pick the worst sources.
Yeah, it's really bad. I wish I can't even say I feel bad about this per se, but it bothers me how bad it is every time I check it. I just did it, and it's just it's like a horror show of sources I would never want to read, or and I just feel like life's too short to spend the rest of my life saying no.
Yeah, to try to train it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I've done this. If you use Facebook a lot, Facebook has a news feed. I've spent time saying, hide this story, hide this publication, hide this story, hide this publication, right? So I've done this for a long time. And I was just looking at it the other day, and I thought to myself, okay, what does this look like inside of Facebook? And I found there's actually a page in settings. You can see everything you hid. And it is hundreds of items. I've spent, I guess, years doing this. And to what end? I still every day say no, and there are stories you could tell the sign of a bad news aggregator is one that picks up stories from a local TV/radio station that has a web page that is just republishing Reuters stories or whatever. So one day I saw the same story, some cute kitten story about whatever. I'm like, I don't know why this is news. I don't want to see this. I don't want to see anything from kdtv.com, whatever it was. But I saw that story again 11 times, just from different little local broadcasting companies around the country, because they're all picking up the same garbage,
If they would just, if all of these news apps would talk to Spotify and learn from Spotify, because Spotify actually seems to get that dialing in thing right. Sort of double down, Apple News is the same way. I don't want to hear about this topic anymore. No, I tried to give it the time, hoping that it would, and it's still all garbage.
Listen, if there's anyone out there who has a high quality news feed of some kind, please let me know. In the morning, I go through I read a couple of newspapers. I read Google News for technology news, and I do a couple of other feed things. But in Google News, I'm literally in their technology section. And every single day, I report something to them and I say, this is not a technology story. And I'm talking, it would be a story about animal husbandry was one the other day. It was a story. No, I mean, it's crazy.
Wow.
Like it's not even close. There was like a women's issue type story. It's just it's mistagged or something, but it's, but I always have the same reaction to this, which is other than my innate anger at the world is if this is the simplest thing in the world, right? When it comes down to it, of all the functions that Google serves, filtering stories by topic is easy, right? This is not anything. But if this company can't do this accurately, why on earth would I trust their AI? You can't do this. Then how is this much more sophisticated thing going to work? Which I think should be the normal reaction to anyone using these products. But which is why we have sort of our reaction to Bing, because we've used it. And yes, we're a little bit worried about, whether or not Bing Chatbot actually, is something we should rely on.
And I do wonder if these things are going to get better because the utilization is increasing, right? That's all.
Have you turned into the dark side of the planet?
The room starting to do its own thing. So.
Pretty soon it's just going to be like,
heard your rant and now this way. I don't know what to do.
Yeah. Thought you could hide.
So in order to power the news generation platform, you might need some hardware to do that. Segue.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So there was a really interesting report in the information that Microsoft is working on their own AI hardware for their data centers, right? Which when you hear that, you're like, right, obviously. I think the recent success they've had with Bing and the understanding that this traffic is only going to explode in it. By the way, it's really expensive. They could save some money if they have AI hardware of their own that they don't have to try to get through NVIDIA, although, by the way, they have a huge partnership with them for that. And I think it's notable that all of their major competitors, companies like Google and Amazon, have been creating their own AI chipsets actually for years in most cases, right? So I think this is them. I think the story here is going to be, eventually we're going to find out that someone high up at Microsoft sent out a Bill Gates type memo one day and said, we are really behind on this. We have to move quick. Like we're going to be lost here if we don't do something.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's an AI all the things letter out there somewhere. Just don't know what it is.
Yep.
I would say the energy around large language model technologies here at the summit has been incredibly high. Folks are very interested. There's lots of conversations going on. I'm doing my best not to violate any NDAs here, but I'm surprised that was a huge talking point. And you and I talked about this before, Paul.
Yep.
You replacing this old laptop. And it's like, it's probably worth holding off for another generation because I think we're going to see dedicated compute units for a lot of this new software.
Yep.
Imminently, really. And this story clearly points to this work's been going on for some time.
That's right.
It's a question of when they commit producing enough of them to put them in a machine.
Yeah, we know that Microsoft has worked with all of their chipset, microprocessor partners, right? AMD, Intel, and Qualcomm to get that stuff going on the client. We know that it's essentially Qualcomm-based Surface Pro 9 and also their Project Voltaire, the Windows Dev Box, I think it's called, which is a Qualcomm-based machine as well. Both have NPUs. And when Microsoft came out with this Mac Mini looking thing last fall and said, here, look at this thing. It's based on ARM. It has an NPU. You can get going on your AI workloads. I think most of us looked at each other and said, what are you talking about? AI workloads, and to date, the types of things that take advantage of this capability in Windows are fairly minor, right? Like the Windows Studio effects type things. We're talking about using AI to blur the background, right? Which is a feature of all video conferencing software, but I guess works better when it's backed with hardware or something. It's probably more effective. There's a bunch of those effects, but very few people in the Windows space have an ARM-based PC. So right now, we're not talking about a lot of people. But like Richard said, he's using a Surface Book 2, and I think 8th gen Intel. So we're getting there 5 years on, whatever, 6 years almost. It's time, and I don't know. You might want to wait. We'll see what happens, because
look in the fall, possibly next spring.
Yep.
We should get some interesting hardware and get on board with that. Plus, the looking at the nature of the products that are coming. It'll be interesting to see how they build an emulator so that they can run the same way on the machine, whether you have it or not. It just runs faster when you've got it.
Yes. Oh boy, what was the demo I just saw that was similar to this? I can't remember if it was an Adobe thing, or I just saw a demo where they're starting to use AI, well, for everything, right? I don't know if you guys have discussed this out in the world, but AI is kind of a thing right now. So companies like Adobe are using AI more and more to apply certain effects to video and still images and so forth. And there was, I can't remember the exact demo, but I just saw a demo that it's sort of like when you do software versus hardware rendering or graphics. Here's what it looks like. Our hardware accelerated graphics very fast. And then in the software version, you can see it draw each line. And it was sort of like that. And I think that's going to be the deal. And that's part of the conversation we had earlier on the show around this notion that Windows 12 is going to be the AI release. And that I wondered out loud, and I sort of just blurted it out, but I sort of said, I wonder if Windows 12 is going to require an NPU because of all these things. It's far more likely that there will be some things that do require an NPU, so you just don't get those if you don't have it. And then some things will just be much slower, which is what you're talking about. You don't have a special processor to run this stuff against, so it will probably go against the GPU, or in some cases the CPU. And it will run, 4 to 10x slower or something.
And like a video game, you'll turn down the resolution mode. Like I can imagine that green screen effect. They'll do the comparison. It's like, here's without the end.
There you go.
Here's with. And you can see that it just looks more natural when we use with.
Yeah, I think that's where we're going. So, you're going to see in the PC space in general, a lot of, it's just going to be part of the chipset. It's just going to arrive. Just like Intel integrated graphics at some point actually became pretty good. NPU will just be part of each of these systems. It's just the way it's going to be.
Okay. Well, I think we can move on to talk about, and I was curious about this, how much new AI announcements we would see, how many new AI announcements would we see at Build versus what we would see ahead of time, as Microsoft and many other companies are going, look, we're doing it too. Here's how we're doing it. Here's what we're doing. So you have a report here about more.
This is Microsoft, and Richard will know, will speak this too. I mean, they have an interesting history of, we have a big developer show coming up in 2 weeks. Here's a developer announcement. They'll actually announce things before the show. And it's like, guys, what are you doing? You have this, but the reason they're doing that is, well, they want to hit on the cycle, right? This is a popular thing right now, but also I think Build is going to be jam-packed with AI announcements in particular, but also just announcements in general. So they released that session list a week or two ago. I'm sure we talked about that. There's a lot of AI stuff in there, but I think the bigger news, so to speak, is going to be during the keynotes. We know Kevin Scott, who's never done a keynote at a major show like this, is going to be doing an AI keynote in particular. This Microsoft CTO, I should say. I think that's going to be one to watch. If you're interested in this stuff, Build is just about a month away, right? So,
I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if Sam Altman walks on stage at some point. Like, why wouldn't he?
Yep, of course.
He's not announced or anything, but it's just like, you do the math and say, look what we're talking about here. Why wouldn't he appear?
Hey, we didn't give you $11 billion not to appear on stage, buddy. Get out here. Yeah, of course he's got. Yeah, absolutely, of course. To a standing ovation, no doubt.
Yeah. But you found the sessions that I found where they're pretty point blank about bring Copilot to your company. I expect it's going to be very much a M365 experience. That you're going to. It's because you're in the Microsoft Graph and your resources are there.
Right.
That these tools will be able to tokenize elements of your data so that they can be identified and correlated quickly for a chatbot to work on. It's just, to me, it feels more and more like this is a new UX, just another way to interface with your data. But
yes,
perhaps to do the thing you've always really struggled with, which is find out, has somebody already made this report? Who else is working on these kinds of documents? Microsoft's made a bunch of attempts in this area. Like they made a product at one point called Delve. It's just they drop very quickly into that creepiness factor that people get really turned off by it, and then the product goes away.
Yeah, Delve was the one that spied on users and said, hey, Bob's been taking a 1 hour and 15-minute lunch a couple of days a week. Maybe we should see what's up with that. Yeah, there was some weirdness there. But to me, the trick, look, Microsoft will have this stuff. It will be part of Microsoft 365. We all know this. We can imagine what Word is going to look like and how it's going to help you write things, right? So, some of that stuff's easy. What I'm most curious about is how they bring this to third parties, right, through Azure. I don't know anything about their existing Azure OpenAI service, what these APIs look like, et cetera, et cetera. I literally have no idea. But what I have spent a lot of time with in the Microsoft software development space over the years is looking at their kind of UX frameworks, right, and how that stuff has changed over time. And I got to tell you, as impressive as some of the capabilities are in what I'll call like the .NET era, the XAML .NET era, I feel like things have gotten so complex that we've kind of lost the script a little bit on what's important and what's not important, like how developers want to spend their time. And just a simple example, like I want to do something like color a title bar in a window, which in VB was the flipping of a single property without writing any code, the simplest thing in the world. It requires a lot of XAML and C# code, actually C# code in this case, for a modern application. It's silly. You can create modern apps.
Style sheets, that's a fun way.
Yeah. But I mean, there's just a complexity. There's a code kind of density. I think we talked about this a little bit, the verbosity of it. And I think for this to kind of take off with third parties, I hope they make it simple. And I know that sounds silly because it's AI and there's nothing simple about AI, but I think the benefit Microsoft can bring to this is to have all that stuff running on the back end and have simple services that run on top of it that let you access that information. And what you're basically doing is plugging in those data sources and saying, hey, what do you want to know? Doing that VB thing where you would create like a beautiful chart or maybe a data grid of back end data that visually shows you what you're looking for, but make that like an AI type back end, or I guess it would be an AI service running on top of the back end. So we'll see. Like I said, I don't know anything about it. Really curious to see how they present this. Because if it's anything like the quantum computing stuff they were talking about a couple of years ago, I can't hit my head against the wall enough to tell you how frustratingly difficult or how impossible that was to understand. It's quantum computing. If you can't understand it, it's because you don't understand it. Exactly.
At least those projects were all MSR. Like they were not trying to sell you anything. They were not bundling with anything you currently bought. It was a set of research projects. They had a huge blunder where they announced that they had found the marjoram fermion.
They had the breakthrough.
They hadn't. Yeah. So, and they had to backtrack on all of that. So they are productizing here. Like this is a set of products. I am concerned about the challenges of using your own data and this kind of fights against that Dunning-Kruger effect. Like all these chatbots are awesome when you know nothing about the subject. Yeah. When we start actually trying to put machine learning models over top of our own data where we know what the right answers are a lot of times and it keeps getting them wrong, right? That's going to be more problematic. I'm very much tuned in this idea of we're on a Gartner hype cycle. We're busy racing up the peak of unreal, impossible expectations and the trough of disillusion.
There it is.
At least once an episode.
Yeah. So we're going to. Yeah. But it's also, why do you go down the trough? It's because companies start getting hurt, right? Or people get hurt. Someone's going to die. Yep. A company's going to miss their numbers because they led the wrong way. There's going to be some major lawsuit. Like that's what sends it spiraling.
There are already examples of this, making up stories about professors, about how they are predators.
Oh, yeah.
There are crazy examples So everyone's like, oh, it's fun. It has to learn from something. What are you going to do? You got to give it out to the world. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, guys, it's fun. Yeah. But it stops being fun when people are injured or dying or whatever. You cause someone.
It's learning from the internet because that's a source of truth.
Yeah. Yeah. We've trained it on Twitter. It's weird. It seems slightly psychopathic for some reason. I don't know what happened.
How do I find a source of water nearby? Go into your vehicle and open up the gas can. What?
No, the answer is I will make you cry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Produce your own water from your tears.
Your mother doesn't love you.
All of that said, I really, really like the idea of having my own personal Copilot. And I understand that's not what this is. This is for companies. But the concept of taking the AI and training it on my own personal information, be it the writing that I've done or even text message conversations that I have, and using all of that to inform, anything,
this is literally what the promise of these digital personal assistants was, right? Mm-hmm. That there would be this thing running in the background that would understand your personal schedule, your work schedule, the people you work with, and the relationships you had, and it would prompt you from time to time when something happened, kind of like a calendar notification on steroids or whatever. Mm-hmm. But really, what you're asking for is that capability. I think what we are all asking for, really, what we would like this thing to do is kind of have this thing that does that, but also helps us in every aspect of our life. You start writing an email, and I know there's something built into Gmail that kind of does this, but it says, hey, before you send that, it seems a little aggressive. You want to tone that down a little bit or something, or you misspelled some words, or here's some mistakes, whatever it is. I think we want that to be everywhere. I have a hard time getting off of writing, but you're writing something or you're creating a graphic for something or whatever. And it has this understanding that, hey, I know you're creating you're putting this image into a PowerPoint presentation for a project. And I know it's about this, and this image has nothing to do with this. How would maybe one of these other images would be better.
Yeah.
Would you like me to format that for you? That kind of thing. And it's free and clear from an intellectual property standpoint or whatever it is. Like you want it to
be clippy,
we are. Yeah. It's all the same continuum, really. Right.
Yeah. I also look at it as a phenomenal sales tool for Microsoft products, right?
Right.
If you're on the M365 Copilot and you're now describing your intended work for the day, it gets to pick the apps for you.
That's right.
Point.
That's right. And this is going back a ways, but back in the day, Microsoft would come out with a new version of Microsoft Office every 3 years or whatever. And you'd go to some place, they'd have a reviewers workshop, and they would have some Microsoft guy or woman do a demo of like all the awesome new stuff that was across the product. Of course, Microsoft Office is several applications at the time, most of which no one ever uses, right? So it was important that whatever scenario they came up with, you had to step through every single application in the suite to get this project done. And it was always this really convoluted mess to try to arrive at that, because that's not how anyone works, right? And the truth is, even if it somehow made sense to use all 7 of the apps or whatever it was that were available in the suite, nobody knows all 7 of those apps. Most people are good at like 1 or 2 of them. And I think what Richard is describing is how that becomes possible. This nonsense scenario from the past becomes reality, because now you don't really necessarily have to be an expert in each of those applications. It will guide you through the parts of them you need to arrive at the other end, whatever the project is you're working on. It's kind of an interesting idea.
The main thing every time you look at a new app is, will this app help me? So the fact that you have an overconfident piece of software saying this app will help you,
sure.
You're overdoing that piece right away. It's like, now let me take you down the tutorial. Mm-hmm. But then to actually include your work in your learning piece as you learn it, that's compelling.
Yeah.
The reality is you own these apps. You're already paying for your E3 or your E5 or whatever account you've got in M365. Just don't know how to use them, so that tool could really help.
That's So the problem I described earlier, when it was just Microsoft Office and a suite of applications, has exponentially multiplied with the introduction of Office and then Microsoft 365. Because anyone who subscribes to this should probably go to the website and look at all the apps, because I bet you don't know half of them even exist.
They've all made up icons.
Yeah. If somebody worked on the icons, they created them. They're kind of nice looking, some of them, and you had no idea those apps even existed, but there they are.
I just wonder about the war inside of Microsoft for whose product gets recommended first for what task.
That's right. Exactly right.
That's going to be a good Jello fight right there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right. We need to take a quick break before we round out the being an AI topic.
Actually, we could just round it out. I think we're done.
If it's a quick one.
Just real quick. We mentioned Microsoft's bringing a bunch of AI developers. I wanted to say Amazon also announced some developer generative AI tools and technologies. The key one being Bedrock. There's more actually to that, but everyone's doing it, right? Except Apple. But Apple, they'll get there. Apple tends to show up for V3, and then they're like, wow, they really kind of hit that one out of the park, didn't they? Those bastards. So they'll get there. I'm sure they'll get there too.
To something, at least.
Yeah.
All right. Let me tell you about Miro. We're bringing you this episode of Windows Weekly. If you and your team are still going from tab to tab, from tool to tool, and in the process losing brilliant ideas and important information along the way, Miro can help you with that, because with Miro, that doesn't happen. Miro is the collaborative visual whiteboard that brings all of your great work together no matter where you are. Whether you're working from home, in a hybrid workspace, or calling in from a studio in the Redmond office, everything comes together in one place online. Creating that one great product needs input from everyone. And that's where Miro comes in with its capabilities to democratize collaboration and input. Miro's infinite collaborative whiteboard gives product teams a perpetual space where they can simply drag and drop insights, they can drag and drop data. Nothing gets lost or forgotten. Miro covers a breadth of use cases so users can build visual assets, they can present their findings, and run brainstorms with cross-functional teams. And you can build out your product vision on a Miro board by brainstorming with sticky notes, comments, live reactions, a voting tool, and even a timer so you can make sure that you get to that consensus quickly. And I love this about Miro. It's got a lot of creativity involved. You can express yourself, bring the whole group together around one idea. It can happen with a quick wireframe, drawing with the pen tool, or putting images and mock-ups on the Miro board. Miro users report saving up to 80 hours per user per year by streamlining conversations and cutting down on meetings. No more meetings. As a result, Miro gives your team the chance to always stay connected to real-time information, and it gives project managers and product leads a bird's eye view of the whole project to ensure nothing slips through the cracks. Be a part of more than 1 million users who join Miro every month. Leo and I use Miro for our show Ask the Tech Guys because it is a great way to have, again, everything in one place. I think if you're thinking about this as a whiteboard tool alone, then you're not quite getting the full concept and the full understanding of what it can do, because it keeps you from having to switch contexts. And when you don't have to switch contexts as much, then you are holding on to those ideas. You're staying in the flow. And so having, every episode, having all the information that I need, questions that people have asked actually being piped in from email or from Twitter or from wherever it happens to be, as well as my show notes, all of that all together on one whiteboard is so nice. And it's great to not have to switch between tabs and apps and move from here to there. It's all right there. I can get as messy as I need to and clean things up afterwards, categorize, organize. It's fantastic. So I'm serious. Go there. Get your first 3 boards for free to start working better at Miro.com/podcast. That's Miro.com/podcast. You don't even need to have a team. Just go there and check it out. Miro.com/podcast. It's kind of fun to just play around with, even as an individual. So thank you, Miro, for sponsoring this week's episode of Windows Weekly. And now it's time to head back into the show with Paul Thurrott and Richard Campbell. And we are now talking about Windows 11.
Are we? Oh, yeah, we are. Oof, you bet we are. Yeah, so between today and our previous show, there have been 2 builds each released to the dev and beta channels, I think. But certainly today we had 2. We had 1 of each, and I believe late last week we had 1 of each as well. But today's new builds, nothing major, right? But the dev build is adding the ability, I would say re-adding the ability to remove the time and date area from the system tray, which is kind of interesting if you want to get rid of that for some reason. And then speaking of behaviors from the past, they're going to change the hover behavior on search. This is something that was broken after 22H2 came out late last year, and they released that search bill update that They never told anybody about the way that search on Windows 11 worked in the past was that you would mouse over the search icon and you would see a jump list of your previous searches. So you could just click on one of those to get back. That ended with the search pill. It doesn't work with the search bar. They are looking at bringing it back. So there you go. That only took 6 to 9 months, depending on how you measure things. And
gestation period for a human.
Yeah. And then in the beta channel, they're adding a feature that was previously tested in the dev channel, still in the dev channel, called Content Adaptive Brightness Control. And this is just a way to individually control the pixels on the screen based on what content is there. So you could have a part of the screen that was a certain brightness level and another part that's a different brightness level, which I think is something we already see on mobile. But anyway, a good idea.
On the backlight being adjustable too, right?
Yeah, based on that.
Not all monitors have that capability.
Yeah. Also, it's enabled by the PC maker, so not everyone will see it. So it's probably something you'll see in new PCs, basically, going forward, or if they decide to support it in existing PCs. And then for you RDC fans out there, you will enjoy this. The first redesign of the remote desktop connection app in, I'm going to say, forever. I don't think it's ever changed. If you're familiar with this app, it works if you use Hyper-V, which I'm going to talk about later. You see it there too. But when you go full screen, you get that little trapezoidal shape at the top that gives you like the pin and the different things you can do. They have, because they're really prioritizing what is important and what isn't, that will be adopting a Windows 11 look and feel sometime soon. So, honestly,
get an update to RDP was Windows 11 look and feel. All right.
It might literally be the only update that has ever occurred to this app. I don't think it's ever been, I could be wrong, but I don't think it's ever been updated. And then late last week, we got 2 other updates. This one's kind of interesting on a couple of levels, but they're adding they're actually going to call it Gallery. It's a view in File Explorer. So if you're looking at a folder full of photos, it will do a gallery view, which doesn't just look like, but is in fact identical to the All Photos view in the Photos app that's in Windows 11, which is actually kind of nice. You can scroll down, you can go by, we'll show you the years of all the photos and stuff. Makes it easy to kind of get through a big set of photos. But the interesting thing about this to me is not that they're adding it to Photo Gallery. I mean, to File Explorer. This is kind of something Microsoft has worked on and off since, I don't know, Windows Vista, basically. I mean, there's been stuff like this. Actually, even Windows XP technically had something a little bit like this. But rather that functionality that literally clearly came right out of the Photos app is being integrated elsewhere. We just learned that Microsoft Edge got the photo editing functionality from the Photos app. I think, actually in the stable shipping version. So if you have whatever the version, 111, I think is the current version, you actually have a way to edit images on the web using the exact interface that you use in the Photos app, but built into the Edge application. So it's kind of interesting seeing them bring that functionality elsewhere. So that's kind of cool. And then separately, they're also
into Windows. Like this is this used to be Microsoft's whole shtick, right? The embrace, extend, extinguish kind of mindset where you take an app and just make it part of Windows. Now they're doing it to their own apps.
And they're doing it to parts of their apps. Like it's kind of like a component of an app, if you will. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
It also simplifies your interface. Like you go look for files first and you look for pictures and then you're already got your tools in. Why do you then have to go to an app and navigate to that folder to get to those photos?
Yeah, that's always been the central dilemma of photo management, probably on any operating system, is do you do it right in the file system, which to me has always worked out pretty well, or do you do it in a dedicated app?
Right.
So they're
motion towards the file system mindset.
Well, they've been screwing around with File Explorer a lot lately. So obviously with 22H2, they added the tabs. There's a session at Build where they're going to talk about how they added the Windows App SDK to File Explorer, which is kind of interesting because they were using something called XAML Islands to get this kind of modern look and feel in File Explorer, which is a classic, Win32 app really under the covers. What they found was that it was too limited and they had to contort it for their own needs, which is not something they could provide to the public. So they went with the Windows App to SDK, and mark my words, what you're going to discover is they had to contort that to their own needs too, and that whatever they did to File Explorer is not going to be something you're going to be able to do in your own apps. I 100% guarantee it. But I will wait and see. I can't wait, but we'll see. Anyway, there's been a lot going on with File Explorer, which is kind of neat because File Explorer, is an app that's basically Explorer.exe. It's been around since Windows 95.
The younger generation, a lot of them don't think about files at all.
Yeah.
They don't know where stuff. There was a great set of articles written recently from multiple sources we were talking about. They just don't know where their files are put because that's not a thing.
It's not a thing. You can't trust people like this, Richard. These people, they don't know. That's not acceptable. You need to know where your files are.
Do you? Do you really?
I think you do. Well, as long as you know they're safe, I guess.
What is it? It's 5 p.m. Do you know where your files are?
Yeah. Your files were right where you left them.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, Richard.
That's the problem.
The professors, specifically, there was a professor of like graphic design or some sort of art, and they had to teach their students how to install font files because the concept of a desktop and where you put files and what folder to make things work was just
hierarchical structure. I mean, and again, these are all metaphors created for the limitations of machines at the time.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
The question is, are those metaphors still relevant? Do we have to know any of this stuff? Now I'm pulling out the IT hat, right? Like in a zero trust world where my identity associates to that file, associates to the resources that are available to me, that is sufficient. Unless you have my identity, you cannot access those files. You cannot see those files. Sure. And knowing the details of how and where they're stored is kind of irrelevant.
So, right. And this is, you can apply this to a lot of different things. So back in the day, and actually, I'm sure today, a lot of old timers especially will organize their email into folders, right? And they get an email from work and they either use a rule or they just move it over and like this goes there and this goes there. And they do this because they want to be able to find things, right? And my argument against this now is when you can use search to find anything instantly, maybe it doesn't matter so much, right? Yeah. And I will say I have found I use a very specific files structure and I use OneDrive. Every once in a while, I can't find something that I'm looking for. And what I found is I don't search in Windows because that never works. That's hilarious. But I do.
If you want, you're just
you can, but my time's valuable. So what I do is I go to OneDrive.com on the web, and I don't have to go into a folder. I just search for the thing, any part of it, and it finds it instantly. I mean, every single time. So yeah,
that's interesting what you're saying, Paul, because we had someone call in on Ask the Tech Guys and was saying, I'm trying to figure out how to speed up my search. Every time I try to search for something on Windows, it takes forever to find what I'm looking for. They had like 2 OneDrive drives, I guess, and they just couldn't get anything. So you actually don't use the built-in.
No, there's a lot. So there's a lot of back and forth on this, right? I'm sure what you guys looked at was like the indexing options dialog that still exists in Windows, which is kind of crazy. And you can go in and you can kind of screw around with that. You can say like, what is this thing going to index? Yada, yada, yada. Technically everything, if you're using OneDrive and, for your files, I mean, and it's inside your user profile unless you moved it. That's indexed. Like it should find that stuff very quickly. My experience is that's not how that works. So if it's super important, I just need to get going. I just use the web search always works.
Someone is saying use everything to search quickly for files on Windows. Is everything an app? Is everything a search? I don't know. I don't know what everything is. Okay. Anyway, sorry. That was not
it's okay. No, back in the day, this was a key thing they were going to solve in Longhorn, right? And one of the embarrassing things that came out during that era was Apple saw that Microsoft was struggling to release Longhorn, and they said, "How much of this can we do quick?" And there's an amazing, probably couple of, but one I can remember in particular of keynotes for Apple events where they added. What Sherlock it was probably called at the time, but whatever desktop search to Tiger, I think it was. And it was instant. And the interface was very reminiscent of what they had in iTunes. In fact, they compared it to, they said, we already created this great indexing, technology for iTunes. So we're going to use it in the Finder, and they just made Microsoft look stupid. And the hilarious thing is that when Windows Vista finally shipped, that's not hilarious. It's sad really, but is that we never had this thing we promised everybody for instant desktop search. It all got, it all went fine because, WinFS never happened and all these ideas they had for the file system.
All that code ended up in other places, but the things they were proposing in 2003 never came to pass.
No. And so that's always been kind of an Achilles heel on the Windows side. I mean, interestingly, it might have been 22H2. They were just talking about this again. Microsoft about making desktop search more instantaneous. But I don't know. Not to me. It's never been great.
I did want to follow up. It's a search tool from voidtools.com. Okay. And there are rave reviews in the chat room about using everything to search on Microsoft, on Windows via the desktop.
Okay.
All right, let us move right along here to our next topic.
Yes, as we mentioned Surface earlier, there are rumors now from credible sources who say that Microsoft is looking at making a smaller version of the Surface Pro because it's not small enough, and an ARM version of Surface Go because that wasn't underpowered enough. So there's some two good decisions right there. I don't. Here's my frustration with Surface because I actually, maybe I'm an outlier here. I really like Surface PCs for the most part. I think Surface laptop, I know it's a kind of a MacBook Air knockoff or what. I think it's beautiful. I think it's a great laptop. Surface Book I have two Surface Books I can see from here. I always really like Surface Book, although I never used it as a clipboard, you take it apart kind of thing. I never really needed that. I liked it as a nice laptop. I don't have a Surface laptop Studio, but I suspect I would love it, and maybe a future one of those is maybe that's what Richard ends up with. I guess we'll see. But these computers are not particularly popular for reasons that I don't quite understand. It seems like the only thing they've made that's ever sold well, relatively speaking, is that Surface Pro design, which I know is the original Surface, but really what we're looking at is the thing that debuted with Surface Pro 3 when they went to the 3x2 screen. It seems like they just hit on this nice form factor. And they're it's like a pop band that can't keep re-releasing the same song over and over again. Like all of their music sounds exactly the same.
Versions of it now.
Yeah. It's a little strange because there have been, in addition to the Surface Pro line itself, there was, the Surface Go, there was Surface 3, there was Surface. Remember we had Surface Pro and Surface,
right?
Surface 2, Surface 3. I just feel like, do we have enough tablets, guys? Really? Like how many? And
they're really weird. Laptops. It's just a question of what kind of keyboard you get, what's the overall form factor. But
sure,
let's face it, the Pro's the hit, right? They made 10 versions of the thing.
That's crazy. I appreciate. It's probably frustrating for them. They did invent's a strong word, but they formalized a form factor, let's call it, that everyone else has copied, right? They once the Surface Pro came out in Surface Pro 3 form anyway, everyone has one now, meaning like Lenovo, Dell, HP, etc. Like everyone makes something like that. For those other companies, those are not the successful products, right? Those companies all make really successful laptops.
Well, I don't know how successful any of these machines are for Microsoft. I've always looked at them as reference machines.
Yeah.
They're setting the bar so that the other vendors can live underneath it, which is also why they're expensive.
Right.
For what you get. You can get a better deal on a comparable performance machine from a Dell or a Lenovo and spend less.
No, it's true. It's true. I listen, it's not the Microsoft logo. There's something about these computers that I really dislike. And it's awkward because if somebody who was non-technical came to me and said, hey, I want to buy a new computer, I would never recommend a Surface ever. I just can't, I wouldn't want anything to happen. I just can't know. I don't know that I can trust this company.
Now, you have some scar tissue there. Have bad use, but you can't say that of any of the recent ones.
No, that's the thing. And that's right. That's a good point. So there was a real low point with Surface, Surface Pro 4 and Surface Book 1, where everything went kind of south from a quality and reliability perspective.
And
it is kind of, it's calmed down.
Hardware, it was their fault.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, 100%. And that has really calmed down in recent years. So
they've learned to make PCs for better or worse. Like Panos's team has got it figured out now.
Yeah.
I think the studios are a unique machine. They're not for everybody.
Right.
But again, if you look at it as the reference machine, they set high bars in places. They don't promote it in a way that's like Apple sets a high bar too, but they promote that high bar to their consumer. I think Microsoft doesn't even try and promote this at the consumer level for the most part. Right. I see them as they're popular in corporate spaces, right? Like I know plenty of IT folk, that are run as listeners where, all of their portable workstations that they provide are Surface Pros.
I wonder if there's some licensing ease here, that we're already on SA or something, and it's just, we're licensing this and this and this, and they make it easy. You have a single source for this stuff. We've come a long way from the dancing schoolgirls with the clicky tablets. Remember from the first, second generation, whatever that was.
Yeah, when they were showing off the keyboard. The few times that you've ever seen Apple make fun of a Microsoft technology the way Microsoft often made fun of Apple technology, it backfired in their face.
Yep. Yeah, it's like combining it. Was it a refrigerator and a toaster?
Yeah,
what was the combination?
And it looks like people like to dance with a refrigerator and a toaster. Okay,
sure. Well, to which I replied, people do like to combine some things, like a microwave and an oven is
pretty good,
popular. I don't know, like a toaster and an oven. I mean, whatever.
Yeah, I really like my blender air fryer. It's
nice.
A good mix. All right, let's take a quick break before we come back.
Wet and dry.
It's both wet. It's odd. It's weird. I can make a fried smoothie. I want to tell you about Cisco Meraki, who are bringing you this episode of Windows Weekly. Cisco Meraki are the experts in cloud-based networking for hybrid work. Whether your employees are working at home, at a cabin in the mountains, or on a lounge chair at the beach with their Surface laptop, a cloud-managed network provides the same exceptional work experience no matter where they are. If you thought hybrid work was going someplace, you would be thinking wrong. It's here to stay. Hybrid work works best in the cloud and has its perks for both employees and for leaders. Workers can move faster, they can deliver better results, and with a cloud-managed network, it all works seamlessly, while leaders can automate distributed operations, build more sustainable workspaces, and proactively protect the network. There was an IDG Market Pulse research report conducted for Meraki, and it highlighted some of the top-tier opportunities in supporting hybrid work. First of all, hybrid work is a priority for 78% of C-suite executives. Leaders want to drive collaboration forward while staying on top of boosting productivity and security. Hybrid work also has its challenges. The IDG report raises the red flag about security, noting that 48% of leaders report cybersecurity threats as a primary obstacle to improving workforce experiences. Always-on security monitoring is part of what makes the cloud-managed network so awesome. IT can also use apps from Meraki's vast ecosystem of partners. These are turnkey solutions built to work seamlessly with the Meraki Cloud platform for asset tracking, location analytics, and more, to gather insights on how people use their workspaces, to reserve workspaces, and also for mobile device management, or MDM. This is integrating devices and systems, which allows the IT to manage, to update, and to troubleshoot company-owned devices even when the device and employee are in a remote location. So you can turn any space into a place of productivity and empower your organization with the same exceptional experience no matter where they work with Meraki and the Cisco suite of technology. Learn how your organization can make hybrid work work. Visit meraki.cisco.com/twit. And we thank Cisco Meraki for sponsoring this week's episode of Windows Weekly. All right, we are back to the show with Paul Thurrott and Richard Campbell, and it's time to head into Xbox Corner.
That'd be a fun little podcast. So we're past the middle of the month, so we're kind of overdue for news on what's coming to Xbox Game Pass over the second half of the month, but Microsoft came through, I think, just today, if I'm not mistaken. Bunch of stuff. Two of these stand out for me. Minecraft Legends just came out today. Is that correct? No, yesterday. So I've been playing that a bit. That's actually a pretty good game. So kind of an action adventure game in the Minecraft space, if that makes sense. If you're familiar with Minecraft, you create your own little world and bad things happen and you kind of have to deal with that stuff, and it's basically just enemies take over the world, and you have to go fight them and stuff. It's pretty good. And then of course Redfall, which unfortunately will only run at 30 frames per second on your Xbox Series X when it first arrives, but it eventually will hit 60 frames per second like a big boy game. But anyway, that's coming. Among the gaming streaming services I did not know existed, there was something called Ubisoft Plus. So Ubisoft makes the Assassin's Creed games. They make the Far Cry games. This thing is on PC, I think is...
I am so mad, Paul Thurrott.
Okay, what happened?
I have been subscribed to Ubisoft Plus for quite some time because I play Assassin's Creed Valhalla on Amazon's Luna, its cloud streaming system. Then my partner got
a second. Why do you have to subscribe to Ubisoft Plus, though? It wouldn't make sense just to buy the one game?
No, so with Amazon Luna, actually that probably... I think I may have been able to do that, but I was able to play a bunch of different Ubisoft games, so I wanted to. And what I ended up doing was I just stuck with Valhalla. So then the problem with it was that I had to constantly have a Ethernet. It just, even with the fast Wi-Fi that I had and with an iPhone that had fast...
How are you... How were you playing where were you playing the game on?
On an iPad or on a Mac.
An iPad.
I could do either.
Are you using a Luna controller?
Yeah, and you use an Amazon Luna controller. Okay. So that was great, right? Well, then my partner ended up getting a PlayStation 5, and I wanted to play it on the PlayStation 5.
And you had to start over.
And I had to buy the game for the PlayStation 5.
Oh, because, it wasn't available. It's still not available on Sony. That's right.
Correct.
And so this is new to Xbox.
So if it's going to Xbox, I wonder if it'll eventually...
Well, actually, you would know. How much do you pay for this thing every month, the version you're using? Is it $9 or $15?
It's $15. It's $15 a month.
So it's expensive for this kind of thing.
Very expensive.
Because it's just one company's games, right? I mean, I would say those two franchises are the big ones. They have a few others, but that's the big stuff.
And it's stacked too. Like Far Cry 6 is visually impressive, but a stupid game. Far Cry phenomenal.
Far Cry 5 was not great.
Yeah.
Yep. Kind of hit or miss. Well, Assassin's Creed games are like that too. So supposedly the next one's kind of going to go back to the classic original style. But I always do the same thing in Assassin. I did this with Valhalla, unfortunately. The previous game, the one that took place in Egypt, was like this, whatever that was called, where you get in the game, it's beautiful, and you play the beginning, and then you're like, I don't know. I just couldn't get it. You know what I mean? Like I play the beginning, it's like, yeah, I don't know. I get it, I guess. We're going on a boat now or something.
Oh, I
don't know.
That makes me sad. It's a really...
No. These things are all very subjective, and you have terrible taste in games. It's fine. So,
yeah, you're right.
So,
so you're right.
Shooting people.
I know what you like.
No. Ubisoft Plus was previously only available on PC and Amazon Luna. Mm-hmm. So there's a new version called Ubisoft Multi-Access, which is the premium tier, and that's actually maybe that's pre-existing. Maybe multi-access means multi-platform, and so it's adding support for the Xbox. Or it did add support for the Xbox. So I looked at this and I was like, geez. I mean, it's like kind of a tough add-on price, if you're already paying for an Xbox Game Pass subscription or something. It'd be kind of cool to get these games somehow. I don't know. So, yeah, it's interesting that they're coming to Xbox.
That Netflix, Disney, Paramount, like too many subscriptions, Pat.
Yep. Yeah, exactly right.
At the same time, these companies can't make a living selling a title straight up anymore.
Right.
They're too expensive to make. They need an ongoing revenue model. But this is the battle that Microsoft had over Office a decade ago. Yep. And now they've succeeded in pretty much you buy M365 for whatever a month per seat. And the gaming industry is trying to do the same.
Yeah. I don't, I did. Yeah. I mean, I tried, I think it was Far Cry 5 I played on Stadia, of all things. So I'll make all kinds of good decisions. So, yeah, I don't know.
But now, when you look at it in the context of these kinds of, subscription models, Microsoft buying up every game company they lay their hands on does make sense.
Right.
Because people don't want 15 different subscriptions.
Yeah, actually, that's going to be part of the back of the book, because I feel like the offering that Microsoft has, which, by the way, is less expensive than this, so makes a lot of sense. We'll get to that. But yeah, I just feel like this thing's a little too expensive. But
I think the one thing about it is that was at first at least made it worth it. If I had if I hadn't put such a pause between when I started playing and then when I picked it up every now and then, it wouldn't be so expensive. Was that you get like the most premium version of the game, so you get all of the downloaded which you end up buying.
No, I get it.
I
get it.
But yeah, at this
that's
point,
true. I mean, that's true on Game Pass. If you want to play Flight Simulator, you get the you don't get the base version, you get the awesome version. But yeah, that makes sense.
If you're committed to playing it within a period of time, for the next 3 or 4 months at most, then it doesn't end up adding up as much as if you just keep.
Yeah. So we don't know what's going to happen on the Sony side, but I would expect this service to come to Sony, right?
Yeah.
And maybe there's an exclusivity window for Microsoft or something. I have no idea, but there's no way this isn't coming to the PlayStation. So it will happen. And then it gets, so did you actually end up buying it on the PlayStation?
I bought it flat out.
So you would have you had to start over then, right?
No, that was, thank God, because if you have an Ubisoft account, then it linked.
Oh, there you go.
So,
great. That's good. Okay. That's cool.
So it wasn't completely a waste, but it was, I had to buy it again, straight out.
Okay. I would say that Amazon Luna today is probably the best. Well, we're going to get to this, but in terms of latency, if you have that controller, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
And that type of game, that's not quite, it's a third person game, I know, but it's not quite the rapid action of like a first person shooter.
Right.
It's probably, it's right in the pocket for what's good for game streaming, I would say. Like high quality graphics, but also good action and stuff. It's probably in the right space for that kind of game, if that makes sense.
I agree. Yeah. I was impressed with it for that, but I know people who are, hardcore gamers who you do need to have that trigger action happen as immediate as possible, who would be a little upset with it.
Yep. Yeah. No, we're going to talk, like I said, about Game Pass Ultimate, which has cloud gaming, which is the streaming service Microsoft have. It's gotten better, but it's a little tough for third person shooters. Let's put it that way. Okay, what else we got here? So in the wake of the debacle that is Halo Infinite, I have expected Microsoft to tear Halo away from 343 Industries, which is the game studio that is responsible for this now that Bungie is gone. And that hasn't happened, but a lot of the people in charge or in the executive part of 343 have been leaving the company, which I don't think is coincidental. And the creative head for Halo Infinite left Microsoft to join Netflix Games. He will create a new AAA multi-platform game and original IP. Interesting. Yeah. So granted, Netflix is all of a sudden one of the big opportunities in the gaming space, I guess. But I think there's been a lot of call for shakeup in the Halo world. So maybe that isn't so surprising. I don't mean to dump on this guy.
If there's one company that has figured out how to stream content to people whose connections can be as bad as, I don't know, somebody spitting peas across the space to get the data to them, it is Netflix. So I find this, I think this is a cool, if they go further than what they've done right now, because right now it's, I think, garbage stuff. But if they make a true streaming gaming system or platform in the future, I want it to be successful really badly. And the reason is I want them to take it out of the stupid Netflix app and put it in its own app so I don't have to see it. Like, I mean, they're clearly trying to push it on the audience, right? But it makes sense. But Netflix games should be its own thing. I don't think that has anything to do with video streaming. It's not like my wife and I are sitting there on the couch one night. We're like, do you want to play an interactive game or do you want to just couch potato it and watch a movie or something? Like this is not the same activity for a lot of people. I know maybe it is for some, but.
Yeah, and Netflix needs to diversify, right? Like, they have licensing other people's content to stream on their very good streaming engine, and those other people are now pulling their content back to do their own bad streaming services.
Right.
And Netflix has tried to make their own stuff, and some of it's been pretty good, and some of it's not been good at all. Yeah. So if they can put the right team together and crank out any billion-dollar hit, like there's only a dozen a year, but if they can snag one or two of those over the next few years, they've got something. If you could make a Call of Duty that was streamed from the very beginning, that was just part of your monthly package, it was never anything else, and it was part of your Netflix account, that will help carry that company. Remember that the guys at Valve stopped making Half-Life because they made Dota 2.
Help us all. Damn those people.
But Dota 2 makes so much money.
But it's not Half-Life. This kills me so much. Right now, I would give them hundreds of dollars to play a new Half-Life.
And
they make
this will
billions. I know. So I haven't written this up yet. I haven't even done it yet. But there's a tip out there in the world now that you can download off of GitHub the files you need to run the Alex game, which is the VR Half-Life experience without VR at all. It's the whole game. So Half-Life Alex costs $60, which is crazy to me. But you can buy that from Steam, and then you can download these files for free from GitHub, and you can just play the game. And this is what I want to do. I want to play another Half-Life game. I don't understand why these guys don't get this. How do you not just have a team of people just working on this?
And they found a way to make even more money.
Oh boy, I don't know.
Yeah, that's reality, and it also speaks to the monthly revenue games as opposed to the package games. Just make more money, and so that's where the talent goes.
I hate this world. Okay. God, it's so frustrating. It's dangerous for me to love things because they always get destroyed. Yeah, I really like you, by the way.
Oh, great. It's funny. When I'm watching shows, I will sometimes find myself accidentally saying out loud, "Oh, I really like that character." And then immediately we'll go, no, that's the worst character possible.
Sniped right then,
If you quickly say, "No, you're just no, I don't like that character." Then they're fine.
That's my special skill with restaurants. If I ever start liking a restaurant too much, it just drops off the planet. Yeah, anywho. Okay, so there's that guy. And then this doesn't deserve too much time, but let's just say that Microsoft has been frigging around with the Xbox UI since there's been an Xbox, and it's never once gotten it right, but it reached ludicrous proportions during the Xbox One timeframe where they kept replacing it. Eventually, over time, they realized there was nothing, despite the fact that this thing was, at the time, a really powerful console. They basically figured out there's nothing we can do to make this thing faster. So the only thing we can do now is just make it more efficient, meaning we'll take it fewer clicks to get to the thing you want to do, which, should have been the UI from the beginning. But you get to the Xbox Series X and S today, it's the same, they brought over the same UI, but they've been screwing around with it. And people just hate, no matter what they do, everyone hates it, So they released a new version of the dashboard and people are like, I can't see my backdrop. And I'm like, this thing should be like the Google search homepage, right? I'm here to do one thing. In this case, I'm typing something into a box. And when I turn on my Xbox, I want to see like the last couple of games I played and then have a button for everything else, because pretty much that's why I'm there. And I don't know why they don't quite get that, but I guess people are going to complain no matter what they do. So whatever the new dashboard is they just released, don't worry, they're going to replace it in 2 weeks. That's how Microsoft works. So that's happening. And then after this being rumored for a couple of weeks, it finally happened. Sega announced this week that they're going to buy the makers of Angry Bird, which, yes, they still make Angry Bird. By the way, this thing still makes millions and millions of dollars a quarter. Different versions of Angry Bird.
Gives you a hint. Like, holy man, that's a lot of money for a game where you chuck birds through the air.
Yeah. Well, when that game first came out, it was the most addictive thing that's ever happened on mobile. It was the biggest thing in the world. And one of my kind of happiest parenting moments, not that it involved parenting, but just moments as a parent, was we were flying home from a trip from Europe with the kids who were little, and they had little iPod touches at the time. And they were playing Angry Birds, and the adults sitting in the row in front of them, I don't know if my son saw, they were also playing Angry Birds, and the four of them colluded together over the seats to show each other how they were doing things, and they were just playing the game together. And I thought, this is a wonderful moment. That makes no sense, but everyone was super addicted, to this game. Yeah, that was possibly 10 years ago. I mean, actually, I'm sure it was 10 years ago. Or something like that.
10 years ago, spending $770 million on that game would have made a lot of sense.
Right.
Today? Right. Really? Wow.
So the latest Angry Bird game, which is I've never heard of, is called Angry Birds Dream Blast, earned $25 million last year.
Wow.
And it was the second biggest Angry Bird game of the year financially, right? But most of their games, and I mean like 90% of their games, are Angry Birds something, right? Angry Birds 2, Angry Birds Dream Blast, Angry Birds Friends, it goes on and on. But Yeah, I mean, they're also having that one-hit wonder problem, but I think the deal here is similar to what Microsoft is trying to achieve with Activision Blizzard, which is this company, Sega, which makes games, obviously used to be a major player in the console hardware business, is probably doing okay, but the biggest part of the market is passing them by, right? Mobile, and this is they may acquire other studios. I don't know. We'll see, but. This is their attempt to get into the mobile game business, in which they have no position right now, basically. So we'll see.
After the acquisition, can they still make another Angry Birds games that sells? And can they make anything else?
Yeah.
Rovio never really was able to make anything else.
Sure. Well, I think, culturally, a Japanese company and a Finnish company have a lot in common, so that'll be fine. And time zones won't be an issue. I don't know. I mean, we'll see. I don't know what to do. I don't know. But there you go. Anyway, you can expect antitrust regulators to ignore this particular deal, so don't worry about
that. Okay, we are coming up on the back of the book, but I do want to take one more quick break, this time to tell you about CashFly, who are bringing you this episode of Windows Weekly. Customers are not going to hang around for your content to load, so don't give them a reason to leave. You can dramatically increase your sites and your app's speeds over long distances for global audiences with CashFly. With more than 3,500 clients in over 80 countries around the world, organizations like Twit consistently use CashFly for scalability, reliability, and unrivaled performance. Some markets are more challenging than others, and content delivery costs vary drastically. Partner with a CDN that knows what it takes to deliver content fast in global markets and is honest about the costs to get you there. You can scale your content delivery in several emerging markets, including South and Central America. Also in Australia, where we've seen IP traffic growing year over year by 25%. Due to a lack of early investment in the region, many network operators have struggled to cover the entire Australian continent, but CashFly has several presences there: Melbourne, Perth, and Sydney. So it isn't a problem for CashFly. India is another market where you can count on CashFly by providing edge-optimized content tailored to the mobile markets and dedicated transfer and caching solutions. CashFly has your needs covered in the Indian market. Reach your audience anywhere in the world with CashFly's 50-plus locations across the globe. That will get you lightning-fast gaming. We were just talking about that, which delivers downloads faster with zero lag, glitches, or outages. Ultra low latency video streaming that delivers video to more than 1 million concurrent users, mobile content optimization that offers automatic and simple image optimization so your site loads faster on any device, and never pay for service overlap again. You can get flexible month-to-month billing for as long as you need it and discounts for fixed terms once you're happy. Design your own contract when you switch to CashFly. How, you may ask, do we know all of this and that CashFly is so great? Well, Twit has been using CashFly for more than a decade now, and we wouldn't have it any other way. Building trusted CDN relationships since 1999, CashFly continues to hold the track record for high-performing, ultra-reliable content delivery. CashFly is the only CDN built for throughput, delivering rich media content up to 10 times faster than traditional delivery methods and 30% faster than other major CDNs. Learn how you can get your first month free at cashfly.com. That's CACHEFLY.com. CashFly, thank you so much for sponsoring this week's episode of Windows Weekly. Let's head back into the show with our back of the book tips and picks. Kicking things off with a tip of the week.
Richard, let me ask you a question.
Yeah, buddy.
Do you ever do anything with virtualization?
All the time.
And okay, so what do you use for that?
Hyper-V.
There you go.
But I own servers, right? It's trivial.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. I have a dedicated machine that's basically a Hyper-V host. Fire them up, pull them down. Don't even think about it. That's not normal. I also have a server closet in my house, so also not normal.
Okay. So I recently, I don't remember when, sometime this month, wrote the virtualization section of the Windows 11 field guide. There are two major virtualization solutions in Windows 11 now. Hyper-V, right, which is the hardware hypervisor solution, right, that debuted in Windows Server 2003. In fact, one of my earliest, one of my funnier stories was Microsoft once shipped a Viridian box to my house so that, I just forgot his name, this guy, Italian speaker, book writer guy, could use it at a speech in Boston. And then I saw an internal email where someone in the server team said, "You just shipped a Viridian box to Thrott's, you're fired." And like I was going to break into it or something.
Dino Esposito.
Thank you. That's who it was. And my wife actually dropped it off, and man, she could not stand that guy. But anyway,
Dino.
So yeah, that's who it was. Thank you. So Esposito, yeah. Anyway, so Hyper-V is the the virtualization solution we've had forever in Windows. It debuted on the client in Windows 8, right? So it kind of got lost in the mess that was Windows 8. I never thought they would bring this to the client. But Windows 11 has a second thing you can use for this type of thing, sort of, called Windows Sandbox. Windows Sandbox is based on Hyper-V. It is lightweight, but it's not configurable in any way. And the idea there is that you can fire up a virtual machine based on your PC. So it's always the version of Windows 11 you have. You have the ability to bring in apps from your configuration if you want to do that. And the reason it exists is so you can test software that you might think is unsafe, right?
Right.
And it's not persistent. You can reboot the virtual machine and it will come back and persist its state. But if you shut it down or close it in any way, it's gone forever. Like everything you do in there is lost. So what you do in Windows Sandbox stays in Windows Sandbox.
Yeah. I know folks who use Windows Sandbox for browsing.
There you go. Yeah.
They're that paranoid. Like
Yep.
The fact that it can never reach the rest of the machine. And those are typically people that have been exploited, like they have clicked on the wrong thing, had their accounts hijacked and so forth. Not that being in the sandbox will stop the account from being hijacked if it's there. Right. But it's usually a lateral exploit. And because there's very little in sandbox, there's very little there.
Yeah, that's true. There is very little there. Yeah. And like the app list is, 5 or 6 items long. It's not very big. So, the question there is like, well, if you want to do virtualization in Windows 11, like what do you use? I mean, obviously Hyper-V is the solution. The problem with both these things is that they require Windows 11 Pro.
Right.
There are actually workarounds on the web to install Hyper-V on Windows 11 Home, and I've done it. It works fine. There are also workarounds for installing Windows Sandbox on Windows 11 Home, and I've tried that, and I've never gotten it to work. So you could get some mileage out of that. There's also a virtualization subsystem in Windows 11 that is used for the Windows subsystem for Linux and for the Windows subsystem for Android, but you don't have to worry about those things too much, right? You just get those, you just install those features and that happens for you. But I got to say, I find for kind of a client type thing and having used, Parallels Desktop on the Mac, I find Hyper-V to be vaguely unfriendly and not necessarily obvious to use. I use it a lot myself. It is what I use, but I actually think for a lot of people, depending on what you're trying to do, Oracle VirtualBox is free. It's something that's kind of interesting. It supports sound out of the box, which Hyper-V does not, which is kind of strange to me.
Hyper-V is a server product.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, I know. But it's, it's almost 10 years later from the client. Like, I mean, it feels like it hasn't been updated in a while, but it is getting the Windows 11 look and feel in the RDC client there. So
better. I'd also say that devs have moved away from using very virtual machines where it's a container world today.
Right.
And it's just more efficient when you're doing development to have a set of containers that are more like what you're going to end up in the production.
Yeah. Anyway.
There was a time when you do development and you were always running a couple of Hyper-V instances at the same time.
Yeah. I use Hyper-V all the time, but I don't know.
But you're not a normal human.
I think that might be the proof. Yeah, that's true. Anyway, just so you know, they're there. And if you do have a Windows 11 Home, Google this, you can probably get them installed. Okay, so the app pick is it's two different things in a way. So also because of the book, and I did this back in March, and then I've actually kind of continued it, is I had to write about the Xbox app, which is part of Windows 11. And to take full advantage of it, you need you need a PC Game Pass or an Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription, right? So Microsoft has 3 of these things. There's one for Xbox, one for PC, and one for both. And the one for both, Ultimate, also includes the cloud gaming service, which is the game streaming stuff. This has gotten significantly better over the years since I first tried it. And years, I guess, year and a half, whatever, it's been a year and a half. So the two standard services are $9.99 a month. The ultimate version is $14.99 per month. I just switched over to it, like I said last month. I'm actually going to hold on to it. I've been trying to get out of my little Call of Duty rut. And the thing, we were talking about Ubisoft Plus. So it's a little bit less money. It's a much bigger collection of games. It spans things like Bethesda and EA Play is in there.
Oh, wow.
It spans platforms if you get Ultimate, and it includes the cloud streaming stuff, which is really interesting. And when I go into this thing, it's funny. I've been playing kind of a mix of old and new games. So today, I was playing a little bit of Minecraft Legends. Also was playing Quake and Quake 2, right? Which are really old, 90s PC games, right?
Yeah. There's no way that stays $15 a month. There's no chance. What they're buying Activision for $69 billion. Yeah. You got to pay that back.
You're right. Yeah.
The thing to do is buy this now and buy a year.
That's right.
Because it's going to go up as soon as the Activision titles start to land.
Yeah, and actually one good way to do that, because they make it harder now to buy it in multi-month or whatever year. And I don't think they even offer technically a year of Xbox Game Pass, whatever. I'm sure they have 3 month and sometimes maybe 6, but they're not big savings over, just buying it month to month. Yeah. But what you can do is buy a year of Xbox Gold Live, which is often on sale. And then you can churn it. You can say, I'm going to switch this over to Game Pass, whatever. And they'll apply whatever, to some number of months. And so when I did that, it went out to next February. So I was like, nice. So I don't actually have to pay for this thing again. So until next February. So that worked out pretty well in my case. So if you can find like the little cards or whatever, they used to have, or buy the codes online, if you can get those on sale, that's a good way to get into it. The reason I want to do this is because I play too much Call of Duty. So I feel obligated to tell you that Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 multiplayer, not the campaign, and not Warzone's always free, but not anything else, is free to play for 1 week on all platforms starting today. So if you're on PlayStation, Xbox, PC, whatever, and you don't own this game and you want to get in and see what it's like, they just launched season 3, which means there's a couple of new multiplayer maps. There's other modes. Compared to what I play a very specific part of the game, but there's a lot going on in season 3. And there's a lot of maps now, because when this thing first launched, last October, I think it was, or November, there were only a handful of multiplayer maps. They added 2, I think, in season 2, but they've added a few more. It's finally to the point kind of where it needs to be. So if you're not sure about this game, it's also on sale. Just saying, you can pick it up. This might be the time.
It's awesome.
Get addicted. I'll see you there.
All right. I think that means it's time to talk about this week's Run As Radio.
This week on Run As, I talked to one George Finney. So George is a professor and a security expert. Has done a bunch of different books, but he did a new one, which I thought was particularly interesting. It's called Project Zero Trust. And what he's done is written a sort of fictionalized account of a company getting breached and then recovering from that and actually getting to a good, secure zero trust model for themselves. It reminds me of the Phoenix Project, which is one of Gene Kim's books about DevOps. And really this sort of effort to stop talking technical about these practices and talking in a more narrative model. That being said, if you're sort of all on board with zero trust and just trying to make your way on it, you probably don't need to read this book. You need to give this book to other people. So maybe the rest of your team, so they can kind of get in the groove. But more importantly, the leadership, the folks you're going to tap for the money and the effort around this. This is a way to tackle this problem. So I was glad to have him on just to have that discussion about how much organizations are struggling to understand the zero trust model and how much of a transformation it is to the way you approach security, and kind of essential in a cloud world.
All right.
It should all be zero trust. That should be everyone's mantra.
I think Paul, you are. It sounds like, because you can't trust that you can like a restaurant and have it stick around.
Listen,
zero trust everywhere.
I have too much experience to know otherwise. I'm just saying, when it comes to technology, zero trust.
Don't trust.
There you
go. All right, let's move on to your picker, the picker of the week. Yes, that is a mix. That is a portmanteau of liquor and pick. The picker of the week.
Well, and this has sort of evolved into these whiskey stories. You know, when I first got an opportunity to do the show, we talked about whiskey a bit, and often I found myself explaining bits about how whiskey was made to sort of understand why I selected this particular bottle. And that has now evolved into, 8 or 9 parts where we talk through the entire Scottish whiskey making process. And Micah, you got to see the end of that last week. And so I asked on the Discord what we should do next, and folks asked for American bourbon. So I'm not going to do a 9-part series on American bourbon because it's not that different. I will focus on the differences. I mean, in the end, for some reason, humans like to take grains and ferment them, distill them to raise them to solvent levels, and then suck flavors out of wood and drink it. Mm-hmm. The American bourbon, of course, starts back with America first being a set of colonies in the UK because it grew a lot of corn. And generally speaking, you only make alcohol when you have enough to eat. And so you have food you have grain left over to store, and before it goes bad, you distill it because it's a way to store it for longer, and it's kind of fun. But the modern American bourbon really starts in 1964 when Congress passes a law declaring bourbon whiskey a distinctive product of the United States. And the federal standards of identity of a distilled spirit, because there is such a thing, specified what an American bourbon was. And it was to be a grain mixture that was at least 51% corn, that would be distilled no higher than 80% alcohol, and then would be aged in new charred American oak barrels. The distillate being put into the barrel can be no higher than 62.5%. And we talked about this when we were talking about barreling on the Scottish whiskey side, that much higher than that, and you start to pull bad flavors out of the wood. So it makes sense that they came in that number, although the Scots use 63.5 because they're often using used bourbon barrels and they still want to pull some flavors from those. If it's spent 2 years, it has to be aged in barrels. It needs to be a minimum of 2 years. At 2 years, it can be called straight bourbon. Most bourbon is aged longer than that. If it's aged less than 4 years, you're required to put an age statement on it. In other words, the youngest thing in the barrel, in the bottle, has to be on the label. After 4 years, you're not required to do that. And so the fact that if you think about most bourbons, you've never seen an age statement on them, they're typically 5 to 6 years old. That's the normal range of aging in Kentucky conditions. It doesn't have to be made in Kentucky, but Kentucky has ideal conditions for it, which are different from Scotland. They have similar water in the sense that there's lots of limestone in Kentucky, which makes the water very soft. But Kentucky is quite a bit drier and quite a bit hotter in the summer and colder in the winters. You know, Scotland is a very humid, temperature consistent place. So its process of aging are different, which is why you rarely see very old aged bourbons. It's very difficult to keep the barrels in range. It's warm enough that they actually lose water and the alcohol level goes up. But that's mostly because its low humidity is so low. Other rules around bourbon whiskey, it has to be made in the U.S. to be called bourbon. No filtration steps at all. I'm looking at you, Jack Daniels. They're not allowed to be called bourbon because you do carbon filtration. Not that it's a bad thing, just those are the rules. Also, no caramel coloring and only water for dilution. So let's talk about how this is different from Scottish whiskey. The first and biggest thing is a mixture of grains, or what's known as the mash bill. So a mash bill is basically the recipe of what kind of grains are you going to use to make your whiskey. And because of the rules, it's going to be corn, first and foremost, at least half corn, typically 67, even as high as 80%. Almost all bourbons, and there are a few exceptions, will have a certain amount of malted barley in it, between 5 and 15%. And that's because it provides amylase, which helps to digest in the fermentation process, the compounds that will tend to make methanol, the stuff that makes you go blind. You want ethanol, as little methanol as possible. And then there'll be a flavor grain, a grain that'll sit in between those two, between the corn and the barley, often rye, sometimes wheat. So most of the whiskey, most of the bourbons you know of, like your Buffalo Traces, Bullets, and so forth, are what they call high rye bourbons. They have 10 to 20% of their content is rye. And then there's a few high wheat bourbons, not as many. I think the best known of them would be Maker's Mark. Maker's Mark is 70% corn, 14% barley, 16% red winter wheat. But also Blanton's, Weller, the famous Pappy Van Winkle, all high wheat bourbons. The other interesting step, because now you have multiple grains, is how you treat the grains in preparation for fermentation. So we're used to malting barley, because malting barley really means germinating it, getting it ready to actually grow to be a plant, and then killing it before it can really live. So 2 or 3 days in water, typically a little bit of churning up until it turns a bit green. And that's actually converting a lot of those long chain carbohydrates into sugars, which we can then extract to make our initial stage of beer. But it doesn't work the same way for corn and for rye. They don't tend to make short chain sugars right off the bat. So there's a different extraction process, and it's called grain cooking. Essentially imagine a gigantic pressure cooker, although the pressures are relatively low. Different grains are cooked, each grain is cooked separately. For production purposes, because we're usually using continuous column stills, we want to keep this process going all of the time. They keep the cooking time down to between 25 and 30 minutes, but they vary the temperature and the pressure depending on the grain. So corn goes at the hottest, about 220 degrees Fahrenheit, is 114 Celsius, for about a half hour. They typically use a little extra pressure on corn because it's the hardest to extract from. It's a very robust grain. But that cooking process helps to break the hulls down a bit, start the sugar conversion process. Rye is a little bit cooler, 170 Fahrenheit, 77 degrees Celsius. And barley, which is already malted, is the lowest at 150 degrees, 66 degrees Celsius. So each of those grains are handled separately. They're done in water in these pressure cookers, and then they're combined into a mash barrel, typically directly into fermentation, and then they're cooled down so they don't kill the yeast. Where in Scotland, yeasts are very consistent. There's basically been strict rules around which yeast to use. In America, the yeasts vary wildly. There also tend to be trade secrets. In the pre-prohibition days, and believe me, the stories about whiskey before and after prohibition are great. I think we'll end up doing a whole thing on that at some point if we want to keep talking about this stuff. Each of these distilleries have basically developed their own and maintained their own yeast. They have little yeast banks, they have growing facilities, and so on. And for some brands, different editions of their bourbon will actually use their different yeast strains. Normally, a fermenter are gigantic tanks. They're usually made of wood, sometimes oak, sometimes cypress. And they operate around 77 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 25 to 30 degrees Celsius. You'll note I'm using all the measurements of the oppressors first because we are talking American. They'll also add sour mash to the tank for fermentation. We'll talk more about sour mash as we go along, but it's basically the leftovers from previous distillations are put into it. You'll see the word sour mash on most bottles. It's a normal thing. There is such a thing as sweet mash. If we were going to make a bourbon without any of the stillage from previous distillations, that would be a sweet mash, but it's not commonly done. The goal is to ferment essentially a strong beer, a kind of what they call distiller's beer, 9 to 11% alcohol, depending on the particular distiller and the particular yeast. Ferments run about 3 to 4 days long. The fermentation process, of course, is warm, and you don't want things to get too hot. So those tanks can only be so big. If they get too hot, it'll kill the yeast. Anything about 104 degrees is going to start killing off yeast. In some cases, some distilleries will actually cool their fermenters. They run coils of stainless steel piping in the tanks to try and keep the temperature down. But there are limits. As that fermentation reaches the alcohol level they expect, they will drain it into a beer tank. These beer tanks tend to be bigger than the fermentation tanks because they are then going to feed it directly into a still, and it's a continuous process. So when the beer tanks, which are stainless steel, get down to about 1/3, there's enough room typically to make a full drop of a fermentation tank into it and keep the process running. I give you a sense that there's an urgency here of continuous flow for most of these bourbon distilleries. And that takes us to distillation. And the vast majority of bourbon distilleries use column stills. Now, a column still is basically a big metal tube, almost always stainless steel, and they're quite large, 15 to as high as 60 feet tall. And somewhere between 2 to 6 feet wide. They're big. I've seen a bunch of them. The larger they are, the higher their level of distillation. And so depending on the way you want to make your bourbon, you'll want a bigger column still or a smaller one. We've talked about column stills a bit in the Scottish series. Not that the column stills are rarely used in Scottish distillery. It's always pot stills, which are batch-based. You load them, you run them, you clean them, you run them again, you do it again. In column stills, the beer is basically being dropped into the top of the still, and inside these columns are a series of plates, and the plates have holes in them. The holes have lips, so the beer has to build up a bit on each plate before it can drip down to the next one. Those holes also allow alcohol to evaporate out, and it's taken out the top of the column still. So beer goes in at the top and works its way down, and alcohol evaporates and heads back up. This whole process happens at relatively low temperatures. The bottom of the column will be the hottest. It's near boiling, somewhere between 200, 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And the top of the column is more like 170 to 185. The small stills typically will distill up to about 60% ABV. Remember, you're not allowed to go over 80%, so the biggest stills tune themselves to go to about 80%. If you go higher than that, you're not allowed to call yourself bourbon. Now you're getting ready to make vodka, essentially, right? Vodkas are often distilled to 93, 95%. So this is a continuous process. You're always able to feed beer into the bottom, into the top, alcohol coming out of the bottom. But you do build up stillage in the bottom. This is leftover bits of grain, or leftover bits of the ferment, proteins, fats, things like that, lots of water. And so that is drained off and shipped to stillage tanks where it will be prepped to be sour mash. In every case, after you come out of the stainless steel column still, you need to be exposed to copper. We talked about this in the Scottish stage as well, where you need to take certain bad flavor compounds out of the distillate, typically sulfurs, which come from the barley and from corn. And so if you're not actually using a pot still, and some distilleries do, you'll use a thing called a doubler. And a doubler is essentially a reflux flow. It's got a sort of dome shape to it. And as the alcohol evaporates up, it hits the walls and falls back down. And some of it will escape out the top. And in the process has this catalytic reaction that removes those poor flavors from the distillate. And then it can head over to into the condensers. So in the case of like a distillery like Maker's Mark, and we've talked about Maker's Mark before, they use a column still that raises it to about 60%. And I've had a chance to sample that 60% in its particular flavor. And he literally took it directly from the still as it was running. And I'm like, aren't you afraid of contamination? Oh, wait, it's pure alcohol. It's going to, what would you sterilize it with? And then running right beside it is the pot still, which raises it from 60% to about 73%. And it does it in a much slower batch process. So they have several of these pot stills, and we get to taste it again. And you saw this really remarkable flavor change, that the sort of oily bitterness that came out of the column still is removed by the pot still, that copper reactions as well as the reflux process. But either way, this all now ends up heading over to the condensers to be cooled. In the meantime, we have this side track where all that stillage is being shipped over to the stillage tanks. Now, this stillage is a bit sour, which really means it's acidic. Recognizing that a pH of 7 is completely neutral. Yeast doesn't actually like to be in a pH environment of 7. They'd rather be in a pH environment of 5.4 to 5.8. It likes a little acidity. It operates faster, generates carbon dioxide, converts to alcohol, and so forth. And so rather than spend money to lower the pH level in the fermentation tanks, you take this sour mash and you treat it, you get it to the right acidity level, and then you put it back into the fermentation tanks to sour the tanks. That is sour mash. It's only a little bit, somewhere between 5 and 10%, depending on the distillery. But it's a mechanism which they use distillage and goes on. All of the rest of the leftovers are dried and turned into animal feed, and then either sold or given away. All right. We're coming out of condensers. We've cooled this liquid that's somewhere between 75 and 80% alcohol, and we turn it back. We get it back into a liquid. It's often tasted at this point, not at that jet fuel volume. They'll usually cut it with water, get down to about 20% and check its grain flavors and so forth. At this point, you really are just tasting the grain. There's no color to it. It's completely clear. And if you're happy with it at that point, sometimes there's sour notes and so forth that might ruin a batch, which does happen. You're ready for barreling. So the barreling process, this is the bourbon process, with one of the things that makes bourbon distinct. Always American white oak barrels. They are 53 U.S. gallons, which is what used to be called a Queen Anne gallon, but nobody talks about that anymore. That comes out to about 200 liters. There are local cooperages all over the different whiskey making areas, and they make the barrels out of this white oak. All oaks are toasted. So as the barrel is assembled, the staves are put into a base, the initial set of bands are put on, and the bottom is put on. And before the upper part of the barrel is contracted to complete its shape and a top put on, they'll do 2 stages of firing. The first stage is called a toasting stage. So this is lower temperature for a longer time, and it actually causes wood sugars, turns the wood red. Quite a bit of color from it. It's almost like caramel. And then the second firing is with much higher heat, and they'll char the inside of the barrels. Every distillery and every brand has their own recipe for how barrels should be done. There's lots of variations in that. Sometimes the char is very strong, sometimes it's lighter. And then the barrel is finished assembly and it's shipped off to the distillery where they can begin their aging process. So barrels are loaded the traditional way. They're typically stored horizontally in rack rooms. Different distilleries have different styles of rack rooms. The most traditional one looks very much like a warehouse. It has multiple floors on it, sometimes even an elevator, and they lay the barrels horizontally in racks. Kentucky is, again, both hotter in the summertime, cooler in the wintertime, and low humidity. So aging is very challenging. Sometimes you lose alcohol, sometimes you lose water, depending on the conditions. And if you go above 80%, you can't sell it as bourbon. And if you go below 40%, you can't sell it as bourbon. So you're playing a game. Many distillers rotate barrels. In fact, in Maker's Mark was famous for having these, or they used to be more popular now, but Maker's Mark has this very famous racking system where they can take the bottom barrel out and have the other barrels slide down. And so every 6 months or so, depending on the season, you have a rotation of where the barrels are taking heat or being in more moderate environments and so forth. There are also some that actually cool, do air circulation or provide other temperature management for the barrel rooms to try and get those barrels to go longer. If you can, again, most bourbons you don't find very old. The typical age is 5 to 6 years. Where you find older bourbons, you'll find their barrel rooms are often made of stone, partially underground, all mechanisms to slow the aging process. You can spend more time in wood without altering the alcohol level near as much. Bottling process is basically the same. Once it's reached a point where they're happy with the aging, a master distiller pulls barrels for a given lot. They sample them, taste test them. Then they'll use the same very similar combining techniques, add water to it to reduce it to its typical proof levels, which are 45 to 47%. Again, a good level for minimizing flocculation. You remember that?
I remember that word.
Not that the Americans do any chill filtration ever. So they do that primarily by keeping their alcohol level a bit higher. And that brings us to our whiskey of the week, which is Woodford Reserve. Woodford Reserve is very well priced, about $35 for a 750 ml bottle or 26-ounce bottle. The history of the site for Woodford Reserve has been many different distilleries over the years. Again, Prohibition had a huge impact on it. Its current owner is a company called Brown-Forman. They also owned Old Forester, Cooper's Craft, and Jack Daniels. The mash bill in their standard Woodford edition is 72% corn, 18% rye, 10% barley. They ferment in 7,500 gallon cypress fats. They run about a 5 to 7 day fermentation. They use very little sour mash, typically as low as 1%, 1 or 2% as all. And unlike virtually any other distillery in the US, they use only pot stills, and they triple pot still distill. So they have a 2,500 gallon beer still. That's the large one, which typically will raise your 9% beer up to 40%. Then they have a low wine still, which is about 1,650 gallons. That takes it to 55%. And then their high wine or spirit still, that raises it up to about 78%. Then they'll cut it with water to 55% and barrel it, typically for 5 to 6 years, in a water-cooled and water-heated rack house. So they take water out of the river all of the time, and if they need cooling, they pump that cold water through the pipes in their rack houses. And in the wintertime, when it gets awfully cold, they actually have a little boiler, and they'll heat water up and pump it through the rack houses to keep the temperature more stable. That's what makes Woodford distinct. It's a triple distilled rye mash. It's quite a mild, easy drinking kind of whiskey. One I recommend. I usually have on my shelf. If you like bourbon, you'll like this one. Hasn't got a lot of punch to it, but it's nicely made and reasonably priced.
Yeah, I've actually seen that in stores. Just right there on the shelf. Not hard to find.
Yeah, not a rare. I mean, there are incredibly rare bourbons. I have pursued a few unicorns over the years, like Parker's Family Select, which only makes a few hundred bottles of that edition any given year. If you want to go nuts on bourbon, you can. But there are plenty of reasonably priced bourbons you can get that drink very nicely.
Yep, I agree.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Windows Weekly. If you would like to watch the show as we record it live, around about Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, you should tune in by going to twit.tv/live. There you will see options to stream the show on lots of different places, Twitch, YouTube Live. Basically, we're streaming in as many places as we can, so you can watch it as we record. The best way to get the show, though, is by subscribing to or following the show, which you can do by going to twit.tv/WW. When you head to that link, you will see the option to subscribe to audio or subscribe to video, your version of choice, across a bunch of different platforms: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Pocket Casts. We try to be in all the places, so that way, no matter what podcast application you're using, you can get the show. Because at the very heart of this, it's an RSS feed. So even if you're using some strange player we haven't ever heard of, you could probably pop that RSS feed in there and get the show as soon as it's done being edited together. I also want to mention Club Twit right quick at twit.tv/club. Twit. Consider joining the club starting at $7 a month or $84 a year. When you join the club, you get several great perks. First, you get access to every single Twitch show with no ads. You also get access to a special Twit Plus bonus feed that has extra content you won't find anywhere else, behind the scenes, before the show, after the show, all sorts of great stuff there. And you gain access to the Club Twit Discord. It is a fun place to go to chat with your fellow Club Twit members and also those of us here at Twit. Along with those great perks, you also are going to get some great Club Twit exclusive shows. There's the Untitled Linux Show, which is a show all about Linux. There's also Paul Thurrot's Hands-on Windows program with, yes, this Paul Thurrott, who is covering all sorts of tips and tricks for Windows to help you make sure you're making the most of that machine you have. Hands-on Mac, if for some reason you're listening to this show and you want to learn more about Apple, then you could head to that show.
Nobody's perfect.
Yeah,
okay.
Nobody's perfect. So you can check that out. That's a show that I host. And last but not last but not least, you can tell how excited I was. We have Scott Wilkinson, who has relaunched Home Theater Geeks. So if you are all about that home theater and want to make sure that, you've got the latest and greatest, or at least that you've got your settings as they should be, check out Home Theater Geeks, all part of Club Twit at twit.tv/clubtwit. Please consider joining. All right, Paul Thurrott of Thurrott.com. Anything you want to pitch this week?
Boy. Okay.
Surprise.
I am on Twitter, as you know. Everything I'm on is my last name. So Thurrott at Thurrott, THURROTT. Best way you guys could support me, if you'd like to, is to buy one of my books. The Windows 11 Field Guide and Windows Everywhere are both available on LeanPub. And the Windows Everywhere book is available on the Kindle on Amazon.
Nice. All right. And Richard Campbell, it is your turn for your pitch.
I'm at richard@darkroom.com. I thought clearly this thing's on a timer, so I thought in between each break I'd reset the timer. It didn't work.
Oh.
So at the dark room. But yeah, you find me at runesradio.com. I'm also at .netrocks.com. Rich Campbell on Twitter, and Rich Campbell at mastodon.social if you happen to wander over there. But always have fun hanging out on Discord with the folks. So you'll see me around.
Awesome. You can find me at Micah Sargent on many a social media network, or head to chihuahua.coffee, CHIHUAHUA.coffee, where I've got links to the places I'm most active online. Please join us again next week for another episode of Windows Weekly, because your favorite guy, Leo Laporte, will be back next week.
Oh, is he coming back? I thought he moved to Europe or something.
Format. Micah, we need to keep you.
Well, that's very kind. I have enjoyed this time that we've spent together, and I will be back again in the future. But I think Leo is ready to join Paul in groaning at about a few Windows changes. So
I'm ready to go to Europe and join him.
Yeah,
Maybe
there you
we
go.
could just switch the format up again.
Where will Paul be coming from this week? Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to Windows Weekly, and they will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Hey, I'm Rod Pyle, editor-in-chief of Ad Astra Magazine, and each week I join with my co-host to bring you This Week in Space, the latest and greatest news from the final frontier. We talk to NASA chiefs, space scientists, engineers, educators, and artists, and sometimes we just shoot the breeze over what's hot and what's not in space, books, and TV. And we do it all for you, our fellow true believers. So whether you're an armchair adventurer or waiting for your turn to grab a slot in Elon's Mars rocket, join us on This Week in Space and be part of the greatest adventure of all time.